Yo, what's up guys, Dwight right here, and thank you for checking out the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about why I bought a Panasonic UX180 instead of a cinema camera in 2021. Alright, so let me talk to you about the pros of the camera. It has a giant lens on it. It just is super wide, so it's equivalent to a 24mm for a full frame, and it goes all the way to around 500mm and digitally zooming into like around 600mm just in one lens. Even though it has a small aperture as a 2.8 to around a 5.6, it's still a pretty great camera. And it's a servo motor lens, so you could like zoom in and out nice and smoothly, and if you miss that rack of zooming in and out with the focus wheels, you also have them built with the lens. Also, I can control the aperture with this lens, which is really good on the lens itself, not internally with another different controller or with the dial, such as on my A6300, and I don't have to deal with that. It feels like a cinema lens, which I can control the iris or aperture and the zoom and the focus all in one kit. The next thing is internal ND. Internal ND is one of the greatest things that you can use when you're a videographer. That means you don't have to go into high shutter speeds without buying external NDs or getting really cheap NDs that give you the X's and so on. So having that internal ND is just perfect. Next thing is in-body stabilization. Since this is a video camera built for videography instead of photography, it has better inbuilt stabilization. Also, since it's from the Panasonic family, their stabilization is crazy good. Even though this camera was made in 2016, it still outpars the GH5 and all of the other mirrorless cameras that are out there. So that's a good to go. And there's not a lot of rolling shutter in this camera. I think it's a global shutter. I could be very wrong on that. But I haven't seen any rolling shutter in any of my shots. Even if I'm like 500mm, I don't see that rolling shutter when shooting very telephoto. They have two phantom power mic XLR inputs right inbuilt to the camera, so I don't need external recorders such as a zoom or sound devices to even use my lavs or even my trusty shotgun mic that I use at all times. I can just like hook it up right here without buying a smaller like Rode mic or Video Mic Pro to put on top. I can actually use my $250 shotgun on there. Now, since I'm coming from the Sony A6300, which has very terrible battery life, I have around 8 batteries that should last me the whole day, I can run this camera all day with one battery because I bought one of those big ones. Very expensive, but is worth the price. This camera can run all day for around probably up to 9 hours. I have not ran out of battery with this camera yet. Now, with every camera, there's always cons with the cameras. So the con with this camera, it is very huge. So I run a Ronin S. This doesn't fit on the Ronin S, even though it is light enough to put on the Ronin S. It can't be put on my gimbal as much. So I bought, I'm going back to steady camming and glide camming to use stabilization on this camera, but I am better at handheld depending if I'm shooting sports or anything like that. Since I haven't been shooting a lot of sports, especially with this camera, then I don't have to use the Steadicam, but training the Steadicam with this camera is a lot of fun. The next thing is the low aperture. With Sony A6300, I can use apertures all the way up to 0.95. That's the only thing I'm missing from this camera, is the low apertures that I can use for nighttime shooting. Another downside, it is a smaller sensor. It is a 1-inch sensor, which is mostly in most of these broadcast cameras. You don't have those larger sensors like as a Super 35 or 35 full frame camera. You have to be a little bit more expensive with those, but since there's a smaller sensor in there, you can have a smaller lens that is much more telephoto, and I would rather go with more variety of shots than a sensor size. If you know how to do video and you know your equipment very well and know how to use it very well, you don't need the aperture to tell a really good story or to make something grand. If you know your limitations with the gear that you're using, you can use it, and I think having different focal lengths is a much greater strength than having a lower aperture for me, per se. That's just my filmmaking. For a lot of filmmakers out there, there is less dynamic range. I think this has lower dynamic range than my Sony a6300. That is around 13 stops of dynamic range if I'm shooting in S-Log3. So that's another bummer if I'm trying to make something filmic. It doesn't even have a log profile on this camera. It's like a Cin 4 profile, but since I already know how to expose an image properly, I can still make it look nice and work with the limitations on that. So what do I personally think about using this camera? Well, when I was looking at a bunch of YouTube videos, a lot of people were recommending getting a Sony, one of their cinema line series, such as the FX3 or the FX6. But those are very expensive cameras just for the body without even the lens. And if I got like the same lens package that I would get here, I would be spending probably like 3 or 4 times more than this camera actually costs. This camera cost me around 28,000 USD. And if I got an FX3, like the lower line, I would actually spend $4,000 without even a lens. And I would get log profiles, and I don't even get internal LED with that. God! I do get XLR ports, but I just don't have the lens.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
And I think, like, as a filmmaker now, going on to be making more stuff and making more stuff by myself, I think it's better if I had something that was more run and gun and that had everything inside the camera than getting a rig that I had to buy more stuff in order to make the quality a little bit better. This looks like a big dad cam, but it has so many features that the cinema cameras have, but at a lower sell point. This camera is still getting sold even though it came out in 2016, and there's a reason why this hasn't been stopped in production, is because it's a very versatile camera. And when I was like thinking about making more YouTube content, I thought this was the go-to for what I was trying to do. And if I wanted to do any cinematic stuff, I still had my Sony a6300 with my cinema lens, my Rokinons, and yeah, I can use that camera for those cinematic shots and use this for shooting most of the other stuff. And it's pretty nice because it doesn't overheat and there is no record time limit. So that's great also. So guys, thanks for watching the video. Subscribe if you like the video, comment down below if you have any questions about this camera. I've been using it for around since April, so yeah. It's a great thing, so I don't know.